You know, Menzoid has his man cave and he has his Superman cape and all that stuff that he says. We've rented it out from the Menzoid here to fill in on the man cave, and of course you won't have the environmentalists in here because we've got our favorite bear and a few other things that are kind of politically incorrect. And we thought we'd bring in Ross McLean from rossmcleansecurity.com. And Ross, welcome to Menzoid's Man Cave.
Yeah, it's great to be in here. It's like Back to the Future a bit.
And so we brought in a former cop and an analyst of policing and crime and all of that. You're kind of a crime specialist now, and obviously counterterrorism. And he's done a lot of work, close protection with billionaires and celebrities and politicians, etc. So, Ross, you know, you're up to speed, and I've heard you on different media talking about the situation now. Is it really as bad as it looks, or is this just a normal time, or what's happening with the perception of policing and trust?
Well, you know, from my point of view, and you know, you don't really want to overstate issues sometimes, Joe, but there's times when you have to call it as you see it with the way that it's going. And I've seen over this last 5-6 years, particularly since the G20, just a real change in policing, the approach of policing. It's escalating more. We're seeing more issues of conflict, and we've seen a couple of cases now that have come up before the courts with police really behaving badly, and in my opinion, against the rule of law.
Now, this is in Toronto, or is it nationally? I know you follow the whole country.
You know what? It's an issue that seems to be going on not just in Toronto. I mean, Toronto, we like to think of it as the center of the universe and everything else, and maybe we're leading in this respect, but the RCMP have their issues. We've seen them go through it with harassment issues with their own female officers. We've seen them go through it in terms of the women who were murdered and whether they investigated that well enough. You know, are they handling complaints well enough? They're having a problem. The Barrie Police Service has had issues. So it's kind of all over. It seems
Calgary and Edmonton and Saskatoon and so
but some forces are reacting really
Windsor.
differently.
Windsor's an example.
Windsor's a great example. Windsor there, the mayor, he saw that the mayor there is also on the police board, and he saw a case of a local doctor got beaten badly in a case of mistaken identity and sued, and that was it for that mayor. He said the culture is going to change. This culture is going to change. I'm not going to stand for it. And lo and behold, within a short period of time, the current police chief was out. They had written a new set of rules called it's their road to accountability, and a new chief has come in.
Now, that hasn't happened here in Toronto. There's been a lot of calls for that post G20, and we're talking about Chief Bill Blair. What are your thoughts? Is it fair to go after a chief of police on all these things, or is it unfair?
It's whether you want to call it unfair or not, it's the law. The way the law is written, and I've heard Chief Blair say this himself in speeches, that the buck stops with him when it comes to discipline and identifying misconduct. He said that very clearly, that if he finds misconduct, he's going to deal with it. And the legislation says he's the one who has to deal with it more than anybody. And my problem with it has come in, Joe, in that one of the things I do when I profile bad guys and killers and things like that, and I try to analyze how people think, I look to see if their words match their actions. And I'm not seeing the words of I'm going to stop misconduct and prosecute it match with the cleaning up of the misconduct. I'm not seeing a match there, so I'm quite concerned about it.
Let's switch gears a little bit. The big trial, Luca Magnotta, who I call Eric Newman. I covered that extensively, and as you know, I've interviewed Eric before all of this happened. You've profiled Luca Magnotta. I know it's before the courts, but what's your take on where it's at now?
Well, where we're at now, it's funny. We're just having the preliminary hearing. He's got a very high-powered lawyer that's been brought in. For the preliminary hearing, the prosecution has to establish the base case for a murder trial to go forward. His defense is objecting to everything. They're conceding nothing. They're trying to get every piece of evidence excluded they possibly can at the preliminary stage because they don't want that in when the trial gets ongoing. You know, there's a publication ban on now. I think the public really needs to learn about how Luca Magnotta became Luca Magnotta the killer.
Last word to you, quickly on the G20. Are we past that, or are the remnants of that still lingering today?
The remnants of that are still lingering because what you've seen, Joe, is the worst part about that, once again, was the cover-up. There was no service recovery for that. And what we're seeing now is the police are stonewalling, in denial about any complaints about their misconduct. There's lots of great ones out there, Joe, lots of good cops, but those bad ones are eating up the airtime for it, and they're ruining it for everybody, and that needs to be cleaned up.
Ross McLean, thank you very much for coming in the Man Cave. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned because we've got more coming up on Men's Ed Mornings. Stick with us.